Hey everybody, Ethan Hammond here. I just wanted to use this video to take a few minutes to more formally introduce myself and talk a little bit about my story, my history, and how I got to where I am now working as a performance therapist. So a personal trainer with a big focus on rehabbing athletes to getting them back into their sport, getting them back into their fitness. So I got started with sports and fitness myself when I was about 12 or 13, originally playing tennis and American football. And when I was about 15 or 16, I started to take up running a lot more, specifically endurance running. And part of the reason for that is like when it comes to sports and stuff, I've never really been very adequate with that. It was a little bit more of a social thing for me, or even with the case of American football, it wasn't something that I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't very smart when it came to our plays and stuff. But what I enjoyed doing was being able to run around and hit people, which was a very, teenage boy kind of thing, isn't it? Um, when I was playing American football in my second year, I started to develop a lot of shoulder and neck injuries. I had a lot of what are called stingers, or more formally, a brachial plexus injury. So, like you have your big network of nerves that branch off and become your brachial, your arm nerves. And what happened is that I got hit several times in such a way that my neck came together and compressed those nerves. Creates a lot of pain. You sometimes are temporarily paralyzed. So like my arm would get stuck in this position. I wasn't able to really move it. It was just like frozen. And that's a protective response. You've had damage to an area, and so your body wants to brace around that area to restrict movement, to restrict strength and performance while it heals. Um, Actually, one of my favorite memories, I say favorite facetiously there, is like I had a stinger during a game, and it was one of the worst ones. And at the end of it, one of my teammates, I was near the bus, and one of my teammates had his big bag full of all of his American football gear, and he like slung it off his shoulder to put it into the storage underneath the bus, and he whacked me in the shoulder when that happened, and that was absolutely bloody miserable when that happened. It was like just gave me another stinger basically, and this started to set me up for a lot of neck and shoulder dysfunction that I had down the road. Um, so after a couple of years of American football, because I was much more passionate about just simply doing running, I transitioned into doing cross country instead of football. And this compiled on a whole host of new issues. Basically, from my first year, so I would have been about 16 now, I started to develop a lot of strains. I was literally straining a hamstring or a quadricep or the side of my hip every single week. Like weekly, I was having some sort of new injury. Um, and it'd be a case of, you're just running and then suddenly it just goes. Like you hear or you feel this kind of ripping sensation, and suddenly things are really painful. Things don't move around too well. Now, I wasn't breaking anything. I didn't like tear muscles off the bone or anything like that. But here's the help that I was getting for this set of weekly injuries. I'd go over to the athletic trainer and I would get iced down. So just numb it until you can't feel it. And I would keep on running and did that like a beast for a couple of years. So progressing through that, you can imagine how when someone gets injured, their body becomes protective of that injury. Everyone understands, like, if you whack your elbow into a door frame, what do? You pull your arm in, you don't really move the arm itself for a little while, but you start moving it with the other hand, you start stroking it, which is a very caring and loving thing. Creating movement and massage helps to tone down the pain response, and something everyone does. It's very instinctive for human beings to do that. And then eventually you can start like doing this kind of motion with it. Everyone knows that like they do that when they get a burn or something, because creating that movement, especially if it's quite like vicious movement, it helps to block pain signals from getting to your brain. Your body prioritizes movement signals over pain signals in terms of like the pathway up into the brain. So it helps with pain. Numbing things helps with pain because that's kind of the definition of numb. You decrease the activity in the nerves so much that you can't feel anything, you can't move as well now. And it also delays healing. So I was having these collective injuries over and over and over again. It was making my hips and my knees and my ankles and my lower back extremely stiff. So by the time I was about 18, I would wake up and first thing in the morning, if I were to try and touch my toes, like just doing that classic hamstring stretch, I would be able to reach about my knees. As in, I would be able to get my hands down to knee level and not much further. My back and the back of my butt and my thighs, they were far too stiff and tight to allow me that much range of motion. So imagine you're that stiff and tight and you carry on doing distance runs. For me, a distance run, my range was like 5 kilometers to about 13 miles. So about half marathons were pretty regular for me. Now, I love to run. And a lot of people who see this will be people who also enjoy running and can understand it's like, if I get injured, I don't want to stop doing my activity. Maybe that's a little bit of ego or a lot of ego, I don't know. But you guys understand it's like, you get injured, it's very off-putting, and you don't want to just simply stop what you're doing. One of the worst things that can happen, both in terms of the quality of advice, but also just simply being told this, like, if you hurt yourself running or weightlifting and you go to a doctor and they're like, well, stop running, stop weightlifting. And sometimes they actually say it like that, like just in general, stop running. You need to stop doing it because it's not good for you. There are medical physicians out there who give that sort of really shit advice. And it's horrible for people because it's very demoralizing to hear that. It really just like pulls your spirit down. And there's one of two reactions that people typically have to that, which is that they either kind of go into a depression or they become very resistant to it. They really stand up to it and it's like, no, you're not going to tell me to stop doing this thing that I love to do, this thing that I'm passionate about doing. And so I'm going to keep doing it even though it hurts me. And what happens is that we get to a point of it, we can ignore the pain, right? Any of you familiar with that? It's like we keep on running, we keep on lifting the weights and doing whatever, and we just kind of train ourselves to ignore the pain of it until we can't. And I had many, many moments in my late teens of just pushing through the pain until I physically couldn't, because I couldn't physically move my limb through enough range of motion with enough strength to allow me to do that activity. Case in point, I strained my thighs so much that my lower back became so excruciatingly painful that I wouldn't be able to walk without limping. And trying to keep running didn't really happen because I wasn't physically capable of running anymore. So what did I do for that? I did the exact same thing that my sports medicine doctor, that my physical therapists, that my athletic trainers, and that my coaches told me to do for years, which was I just needed to stretch it out. And if it's actively hurting really bad, take pain pills, take your ibuprofen, and ice it. And that never did anything to actually help, because why in the world would it? What does icing an injury or stretching out an injury have anything to do with actually fixing the injury and helping you to do it better? And this is where a lot of healthcare, this really stood out to me. And this is where a lot of healthcare professionals really go wrong, is that when an athlete gets hurt, they focus 100% entirely on the pain aspect. In fact, if you go to most physical therapists or physiotherapists, and you're not actively in pain, they can't really do anything for you, because that's their focus, that's their training, that's what they're trained for, they ask the question, pain, yes, no. If yes, treat the pain. Do whatever we can to get them away from the pain response. And that can be a case of the athlete just learns to ignore it. It can be the case of they become dependent on pain pills. I wasn't really a big fan of pain pills. They didn't really do a whole lot, but I was a really big fan of icing. And I used so many ice packs so frequently to help things feel better, because I was in a lot of agony. But also it was a case of I was a teenage boy. I was taught, you don't express emotions like that. Don't cry. Wipe away those tears and stop doing that. You can't express emotions. That's not allowed, unless it's like happy. But you're not allowed to express negative emotions. That's illegal. So basically, I had a whole lot of joint dysfunction come out of this. Years and years of this. My knees, my ankles, my hips, and my lower back were so incredibly stiff and tight. Had chronic tendonitis for years and years. And one of the worst offenders here was that I had developed shin splints. So shin splints, if you're unaware of it, there's many things that can cause it, but one of the biggest things that we focus on is that when you run by heel striking, as in you reach your leg out in front of you, because you jumped onto your front leg, which is how most people in the modern world will run, especially when they wear really thick-soled shoes, and you crash your body weight down onto your heel when you run. So do that a few thousand times or several thousand times a week, there's a lot of impact force that's coming up through your calf. Your calf has to respond to that. It becomes a lot bigger. It can become a lot stronger from it. That is a possibility, but typically it becomes incredibly stiff and really swollen and big. And the idea here is that because the calf is developing, the back of the lower leg is developing so much, the front of the leg, which isn't really getting used because you're not running on the ball of the foot, which activates your shin a lot more, it kind of atrophies and it gets pulled on by the back of your lower leg. And so that kind of creates this sensation. What we think is going on is that it's actually pulling your shin muscle off the bone. And that's actually what it feels like. It's a very deep, extremely achy, throbbing pain. It almost feels like a very fresh bruise up underneath the muscle, like almost like it's on the bone itself, which it might be. It's a horrible sensation. Had them in both legs, and I had shin splints consistently for about 4 years. So from about age 17 or 18 to about 21, 22-ish. I continued running because I genuinely enjoy running. I love going out into the forest. We had an arboretum outside of my neighborhood where I grew up, and I would run down there and just be out in nature, out in the woods. It was glorious. But it was always really painful. And whenever I tried to do a long run, so pretty much every weekend, I like to start off my Saturday mornings with like a 10 to 13 mile run. So getting up to about to a half marathon, either weekly or like every other week. That was something I try to make normal. But what would always happen is my back would start hurting so much, I would have to hobble back home and limp back home, and then spend the rest of the morning stretching out and icing because I was just in agony from that. Fast forward a couple of years, by about my early 20s, I don't know exactly when this started, but I'd come across Brian McKenzie on the YouTubes. Brian used to be a really big name in CrossFit. I don't know what happened specifically, but he's gotten away from CrossFit, and he had developed the CrossFit Endurance program, which it's no longer a thing, but it was CrossFit's like running program and endurance training program, hence the name CrossFit Endurance. But Brian McKenzie was fascinating and still is fascinating. I love following his content and listening to the things that he talks about with fitness and other stuff. He talks about kind of a wide variety of things, but he talks about running form. And this was a very new thing to me because isn't running just something that you just go out and do? That's what everyone does. Like people grow up running. As soon as you start to walk and you start to get some stability, so like literally as a 1-year-old to like an 18-month-old, you start walking and you start trying to run as soon as you possibly can. It's like all human beings who have legs and have the capacity to do it, they all start off running, and it is a very instinctual thing. But what's funny is that if you actually look at any 2-year-old run, every single 2-year-old in the world who has ever existed all run in the exact same way, which is that they lean forward and they catch themselves. And they just, if they're actually keeping up with the running stride, they're always falling forward and they're always just barely catching themselves enough that they can keep running in perpetuality. It's not a case of they're reaching their leg out in front of them to catch themselves totally and then having to break their body with each and every stride, because that'd be silly. Here's an easy example, guys. Take off your shoes and socks, be on a hardwood floor, or some floor that's, actually it doesn't even matter what flooring you're on, because the mechanics will always be the same, and jump in place as if you're skipping rope. And what you'll find is that every single human being, there is no variety in this per human being. No one is special in this regard. Everyone jumps in the exact same way, which is that they jump and land on the ball of their foot, without exception. There is seriously no exception to that whatsoever. All human beings jump like that. But what happens when people tend to get to about 5 or 6 years old, now they're sitting in school all day long. And I know for me, when I was in the 3rd grade, so I was about 8, 9, they took away recess. So now we just have a 15-minute break in the classroom. So now we're not getting outside to be able to run around. I was in 3rd grade. I was 8 or 9 when they stopped letting us do that. That's really weird. Like, why not get these little kids who are growing so much, to be outside, be in the sunshine, be able to run around and express all that energy that we have when we're so young, and hopefully still do when we're adults. And what happens is that you're sitting down all the time, your hips start to get really stiff and tight because your body adapts to whatever you throw at it. And that includes position. if you chronically hold a position, your body will make you better at holding that position, whatever it is, and that includes sitting. So hips start to get really stiff and tight, and what happens to the shoes is that everyone, at least in America and the UK, everyone starts to get shoes that have really thick heels. Whereas if you look at baby shoes, they're always really flat, and they're actually broad enough. They're actually like semi the shape of the foot. But our shoes get really thick heels. Like sometimes they're like an inch thick of foam to protect your heel. Which if you're jumping and landing, you're not using your heel, are you? You don't impact on the heel. Actually, I need to back up a second. Let's go back to the jumping in place example. Why would you jump and land on your balls of the feet? Like, why is that important? Try jumping and landing on your heels. Actually, pick your toes up, stand there on your heels, balance, and try to jump up and down. A couple of things will happen. One, either you won't be able to do it at all. I can do it because I've specifically practiced it. You'll notice that you have very little power output. Like you could not do a 24-inch box jump like that. That is nigh impossible. You can't produce enough power through your legs and hips to allow you to jump considerably. So, and third thing, if you can actually make it happen, you are barefoot here. You're ideally on a hardwood floor just to exacerbate this point. It will be a little bit painful. It's not comfortable. And you will feel all this jolting impact all the way from your heel, all the way up your body into your head. It's not comfortable. But people run like that, where they strike with their heel every single time. But because the heel of their shoe is so thick, it helps to absorb that impact, and now it's not painful. And with the combination of hips becoming really stiff and tight, which kind of helps to throw the leg into a forward position, in theory, and with the combination of the really thick heels that for some reason also compress the toes. Like, why do so many modern shoes come forward in the front? Your foot is not shaped like that. Your foot is broad. Pardon me. Your toes should be able to splay out a little bit, but it's like shoe companies have an idea that your foot is like this rather than like this. It makes no sense whatsoever. Both like aesthetically, I don't see anything that's attractive about narrow-toed shoes, but also functionality. Like our feet aren't shaped like that. It actually warps your skeleton, and people will get their toes warped to the inside when they chronically wear narrow-toed shoes. It looks fascinating on an x-ray, by the way. So Brian McKenzie brought all of this to light. So everything I've been talking about the jumping and landing and the running, he really exemplifies this and talks about this a lot. And he's like, running is a very natural thing, but it becomes a case of teaching and learning. Yes, all human beings start off by running via falling forward and just catching themselves on the ball of their feet. Everyone does that when they start off. But eventually lifestyle takes over in certain domains in certain ways, and how we run starts to shift. Actually, I've had a point of someone commenting how weird I look when I run, because in the modern day I run via falling forward and landing on the ball of my foot. And it doesn't look like someone who's reaching their leg out in front of them, landing on the ball on the heel of the foot, which is so uncomfortable to do now. And honestly, it always was, but I adapted around it. So, yeah, someone has commented before how weird I look doing that. It's like, you know nothing about biomechanics. You have no place to be commenting on this at all. So anyways, but that kind of exemplifies how natural and normal it has become for a lot of people, to the point that actually running normally, like a human being, can look weird to a lot of people. It's kind of like how if you eat nothing but McDonald's and pizza and cake all day long, nobody bats an eye. But if you start eating a lot of steak and eggs, then people think suddenly they become medical doctors and think that they should be giving you nutrition advice. And also people think that's really weird to be consuming a species appropriate diet that's rich in protein and fat. So by around my early 20s, I started to get this idea of, hey, there's this thing of like proper biomechanics. This is the way that human beings are actually supposed to be moving. And this kind of transitioned me into getting into CrossFit. Now, my first introduction to CrossFit was that it's a total piece of crap system. It gives people a condition called rhabdomyolysis, where their muscles are literally under so much stress that they start to rip apart, and you like piss out your own blood because the muscles are like bleeding out into your body. You basically have internal bleeding or something like that. And it's like, that was apparently the case for a couple of people ever in CrossFit. It was drastically over exaggerated by the media. People hated on CrossFit for so long, and that's just them not understanding it, but also not having good quality coaches in it. And I can say for a fact that I've seen a lot, and I've had a lot of really horrible coaches in CrossFit. There are people who they're just jocks. They're just people who, sport and fitness was their life in high school, and they just kind of kept up that lifestyle going out of it. So they got some personal training license, they got their CrossFit certificate, they were able to then open up their own gym, and they are bloody morons. They don't care anything about you and your health. They care about, are you pushing it to the highest intensity possible? And if you hurt yourself, that's just part of it. And there's a lot of shit coaches out there like that. They're the ones to be stayed away from. And then when I moved over to the UK to marry my now wife, and the coaching quality here in my city in Southampton, England, was like on a whole nother level. The coaching here, we focus a lot on biomechanics. We get taught how to do things like squat, how to press overhead, which is something you should get taught in any CrossFit gym anyways, or any gym, it doesn't matter. Any personal trainer should go over these things, but the quality of it was on another level. So we, the coaches over there, so I'm a coach there now, we prioritize biomechanics so much. People at our gym don't get hurt, not from movement. What happens is that sometimes people get hurt from accidents, because sometimes life just throws you a curveball. Sometimes you go up to jump on a box, you kind of miss it, and you scrape your shin down the corner of it, and you actually leave part of your shin on the box. It's horrible. It happens, unfortunately. Or someone is on the pull-up bar and their grip just slips. It was just a freak accident. They didn't chalk. They got a little bit too sweaty. They were really tired and their grip slipped. They fell back and they hit their head on the ground. They got a mild concussion. That could happen to anyone at any time. That's what we would call a catastrophic incident. So in terms of, hey, they were squatting and their knee just blew up. They were squatting and their hip blew up. They were running and their ankle just exploded. They were pressing overhead and their shoulder basically just dislocated and tore. Things like that never happen at our gym, ever. And we have some powerful athletes who are moving some gargantuan weights around their body. They don't get injured in this way. They don't experience these strains, these muscle rips, these dislocations that you can actually see at other gyms. And it's because we have such a powerful focus on getting people to move, because we understand that human beings are, by design and by default, strong, athletic, pain-free creatures with full range of motion. And so this is kind of where my journey went through my 20s of understanding and realizing that that is absolutely true. And I will keep saying this until the day I die. Human beings are meant to have full range of motion everywhere. You wake up first thing in the morning, you should have full range of motion. You should be able to plop down into the bottom of a squat, ass to grass, instantly. That's a human right. You should not have to warm up to being a human being. But because running is so painful for so many people, it's so incredibly common. 80% of all runners have low back pain. That's an outstanding figure. And this is talking about both recreational and competitive athletes. And expands out into the fitness, the rest of the fitness world, whatever sports as well. The vast majority of athletes have a lot of chronic pain. The most popular points are either chronic shoulder dysfunction, which also includes the neck as well, and the lower back. These are the worst offenders. Outside of that is knees and hips. So it kind of expands from the spine going outward in terms of the frequency of dysfunction that we see. And so my training through my 20s basically took me through this amazing roller coaster ride that took me across America and into the United Kingdom, of learning a lot about biomechanics, learning about, hey, this is how the human being is actually meant to move. How we're built, how we're designed, how we are anatomically arranged is not an accident. Our bodies are arranged in such a way that we are literally the best endurance runners on the entire planet. There's no other animal out there that can outrun a trained endurance runner. Not even horses. I'm not exactly sure. There may be some like, would be, I guess, like a purebred, thoroughbred, whatever, Arabian horse that are like the best endurance runners for horses. and maybe they could give some human endurance runners a run for their money. But like there's a race in Australia. It's the longest ultra run in the world, I think. It takes like 5 days to complete, 3 to 5 days. And some of these people will run it constantly, no sleep at night. They will literally run 72 hours straight or more. Actually, I think I have a cousin who's done like an 84-hour run before, something like that. That's ridiculous to me. The most I've ever gone is like 5.5 hours. 5 hours 40 minutes is what I did my first marathon in. So about 20. That run specifically was about 27 and a half miles, slightly over a marathon. Anyways, point is, I went through my 20s, went to university studying physiology, and after I got done with that, studied a lot with Yoga Tune-Up, which is a corrective exercise system created by Jill Miller, who looks a lot at the connective tissue of the human body and how when connective tissue is dysfunctional, because it's always adapting to how we're moving and how we're holding ourselves. So like if I have a very forward head posture, and you'll notice that when I did this, my voice changed, as opposed to here, my voice is very different. I'm cutting off my airflow there. But what happens if people are always like that all day long? I can't breathe as well. I tend to breathe into my chest. My upper back is becoming extraordinarily stiff and tight, holding up my 10-pound head, or however much it weighs, like 5 or 6 kilos is an average adult head. And we find that there's these lifestyle factors that we can learn how to do these corrective exercises and this deep tissue massage that you can do entirely on your own to kind of assess your position, to make corrections on it so that things can function a little bit better, so that you can have better posture and better control over your body. So yeah, it became a lot of work studying posture, studying metabolism and nutrition, because hey, there's a lot of correlations when it comes to nutrition of if people eat in a certain way, their bodies start to break down. So like vegans, for example, the vast majority of vegans drop out of veganism within about 5 years, according to some statistics. And what we see with a lot of vegans is that their bones become very brittle, their teeth become brittle, they have greater incidences of being sick, and they can't really build muscle as well. Some do. Some are very effective. Some can tolerate a high plant diet very well, and it seems to work for them. And more power to you if that's your lifestyle and that's how you want to be. But what we see consistently when people have a extremely meat-based diet and they're eating primarily muscle meat, eggs, salt, water. So imagine like just eating beef and just drinking water. People can live like that. People do live like that. And it's always the case of, or almost always the case of, they become quite muscular. They don't have brittle bones. They're not sick all the time. They're not cold all the time. And their body is like in this constant state of building up and being strong and being powerful and not having a lot of chronic disease. So it's a really cool thing there. And it turns out like if we move like a human being, if we eat like a human being, and if we're not stressed out all day long, all the time, then our bodies seem to function much more effectively. And so that's what I started to work on with other people. So I worked on it with myself. I found out that if I could apply a lot of these yoga tune-up drills, and I also went through CrossFit Mobility, which is a very similar sort of thing. And what I found is like I could do this mobility work on myself, and suddenly, after just like within a few weeks, it was like I could squat full range of motion, where a few years ago, and probably up to that day as well, I couldn't really reach down. I couldn't reach the floor. I could barely reach my hands past my knees for stretching on my hamstrings. That's ridiculously stiff and tight. So moving forward, I just spent a lot of my 20s, and still to this day, I'm 31 now, just constantly, I'll say researching, as in reading research, not actually conducting my own research, but I technically was, in terms of working with other people, found out that I could restore my own range of motion, which by default helped me to build up a lot more muscle, cleaned up my nutrition as well, and it's like I stopped having joint pain. And I found out that I could work with other people on this stuff as well. I started up my own business, Mobility, to help people improve their own mobility for the sake of getting them back into their athletics. So having like these 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds who are like, I can't run anymore. I can't play tennis anymore. I can't play racquetball anymore because my shoulder hurts, my elbow hurts, my hip hurts, my something is hurt. I'm so stiff and tight, I can't move that well. So I found out like I could help them to restore their range of motion. I could get them to work out in very specific ways so that they could build their muscle and fix their joint pain. Because how many of you are familiar with lifting weights and you develop joint pain as a result? That's not supposed to happen. But because it's so incredibly common, people think it's normal, but it's not normal. It's just really common. And just the mere fact that something happens to a lot of people doesn't mean that's the way it should be. So I started to expand my outreach to people. When I moved to the UK, I eventually became a CrossFit coach, which allowed me to really implement these biomechanical rules on movement to a plethora of people, to a lot of people. So yearly working with hundreds and hundreds of people, and that allows us to teach really good squatting mechanics, really good breathing mechanics, really good pressing mechanics, and we're getting the whole body moving the way it should be through a full range of motion and displaying strength and control through that range of motion. Now these people, they don't really have joint dysfunction. When they do, they can come see me, and I work on a professional level with getting them rehab, because sometimes we have a lot of people, sometimes people just don't have that mind-body connection, and they can't always move themselves perfectly, and incidents do happen. It's not perfect. But we get them rehabbed, and then the pain doesn't usually come back. It's a really cool thing. So like, I blew up my back deadlifting. Well, let's teach you how to deadlift. When did your physical therapist ever teach you how to deadlift or how to run? And that's one of the biggest problems. This is actually a big red flag that I tell everybody that I can. If you are going to go see a healthcare professional, ask them how much they deadlift or how much they squat or how much they snatch. If you find out that they don't actually work out at all, go find another one. You don't even have to be polite about it. In fact, I give you permission to be a little bit rude and a little bit like in their face about it. You don't work out, so how the hell can you help me to work out? They don't understand movement. They don't understand human mechanics. Some do. There are some very high quality physical therapists out there that I have so much respect for and that I have learned a lot from. But a big majority of them, and this is going by a lot of clients that I've had who have worked with physios and chiros and osteopaths for years and years and years, and they don't get any better. And we go over the rehab that they've been doing all that time, and it was a bloody waste of time. They did a lot of stretching, and they did the most mild, weakest, most pathetic resistance training possible, which doesn't do anything to help you actually build muscle, because you need to build muscle in order to be healthy. Your skeletal health is so important to people, but they don't understand how to be sustainable with this stuff. And so we have a case of people, they stop working out in their 20s. By the time they hit their 30th birthday, it's like their body just breaks down, and then they just live the rest of their life in pain. And I'm committed to, one, not being like that myself. I'm not living the rest of my life in chronic pain and chronic dysfunction. I'm going to live the rest of my life in chronic function and chronic having the ability to be a human being, being able to squat, being able to sprint, being able to lift heavy-ass weights as much as I want, because I don't hurt from it, because I'm doing it in such a way that I'm not breaking my body down. I'm just building it up. And then professing that to other people as much as I possibly can. I also I started to get really greedy about a year ago. So I work as a CrossFit coach and I work as a rehab specialist for athletes, but I've only really done that in person. And I started to get really greedy, and I started to shift to online personal training, where I can reach the world now. I'm not just stuck to Southampton. I can reach anybody in the world and give them very high quality personal training for the sake of rehabbing injuries and getting you back into personal training. That's my gig. But yeah, that's basically the story of how I got to where I am now, and what I've dealt with and how I could heal from that. And now squatting over 300 pounds, so 160 kilos, I think is my best so far. No knee pain, no hip pain. I got full range of motion, can get my butt below my knees just fine during that heavy squat, and it's great. And the biggest part is that even after doing those workouts, going as heavy as possible, things still feel great. It's not a case of I'm sacrificing my health and safety, because again, human beings were built to move. We're built to be strong and powerful. So if you believe that, I would like to hear some comments or see some comments below this video kind of confirming your belief in that as well. If you don't believe in that, then we need to fix that. We honestly need to get you around to thinking and having this more positive mentality, this more positive thought process that, hey, my body can be strong again. I just need to remove the obstructions that's keeping it from healing, keeping it from being amazing and feeling amazing and performing amazingly. And as long as we can keep on top of our fitness in a sustainable way, we can see like a new generation of people who are growing up not being obese, not being not having chronic lower back pain, not having chronic knee and hip pain, so that they can, stand up and sit down without feeling like something's going to break. Because that's not normal. It's really common. It's not normal, and that's no way to live. Um, yeah. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you got something out of that, enjoyed it. Okay. That's my little history, my little bio. And I will see you guys later. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out a lot knowing that people are seeing this and that it's valuable. And it'll help you to keep up with the mobility content that I put out. So hopefully that we can help you to build a lot more muscle without breaking down your joints, that we can actually build up your joints so that they're strong and powerful and pain-free, and that it's going to remain like that for the rest of your life as much as we can bloody help it.